Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first podcast today. We have a special guest, Matt. You've seen him multiple times on the channel, whether if it's game-related, challenges, ranking, tier lists as well. But today we're going to kind of dive a little more into something that he has, nice ASMR, they can hear that, that we've hit on before, but ASL and signing. So welcome, Matt, to the show. I noticed that you have represented on your shirt as well some sign language, and that's how you say whatever? Or is that...
I mean, like, yes and no. I think that's more of just like the...
Why are you looking at me?
That's like a whatever.
Look at the camera, damn it. Because I'm right there. That's how podcasting works. But, okay, well, can you kind of tell us, just talk about it, break it down for us, let us know what it's all about, kind of how you got into it initially, the community aspect of it, like maybe the difficulties that people in the signing community might have trouble with, or maybe some misconceptions. I know that you're not deaf, but, maybe some things that you've noticed in your time learning to become licensed and stuff like that. Just kind of your experience. This, we're just having a nice little podcast on ASL, sign language, stuff like that. So it's all you. You got the floor. Whatever you want.
Oh man. All right. So, for anybody who already knows the story, you can probably ignore this part because I tell the story quite often. But long story short, I got started because my mother had a sign dictionary at home, and I picked it up and I read it through until it was falling apart on me. I think it was like Paragees ASL dictionary. I read that thing cover to cover. You can, like, the spine is breaking on it. I'd use duct tape at a couple points to like get it back together. And that was my sophomore year of high school. And that was just what I did in between classes and when I had free time. I just like read through that book, and that was how I got started. And then I graduated high school, and my aunt was paying for college, and she wanted me to go more full time, and I was like, I don't even know what I want to do, so like, why would I just pick random classes? So I decided to pick up ASL 1. It was just like a filler class. I didn't know, that was all I knew. And I really liked it, and I was really good at it, and probably was because I read that book, but I didn't have the appropriate grammar down, because they are different grammars from English. Sorry, I thought I was going to burp.
So it sounds like this all just kind of happened by a book that your mother had initially, and it kind of just snowballed from there and became something way out there.
Mm-hmm. And then I just really liked it in ASL 1, and then we started ASL 2. And then I was going to take ASL 3 in the the spring of 2016, but the community college where I was going did not offer ASL 3 for that semester, so I thought that I would take Deaf Culture instead. It's at least something that's kind of related, because I was thinking that I wanted to transfer to Phoenix College, which is where I just graduated from, and / am currently going, because I'm taking another class next semester. And they canceled that class, so I thought, oh, whatever, like, I'll just take a semester off. But I didn't want to lose any of the skill that I had, so I decided to look online, and I found one of the deaf meetup social hours that happen on Thursday nights. So I went there, and it was just a chill time. When I first did go, I did have to like psych myself up, because we were in a Paradise Bakery, and there was a group of everybody off in the corner. Well, like half of the restaurant, and then I was in the other half of the restaurant, just trying to like psych myself up to go and not be like so freaked out, because I did not know anything still as far as sign language went. So after about 5 to 10 minutes, psyched myself up, went over, started chatting with people, and some people I understood okay, and I think it was because they knew about where my skill level was. There was one guy who would say something to me, and it would just go over my head.
Yeah.
Had no idea. I asked him to repeat, I think like the sign computer. It was like 3 or 4 times I had nothing. And then there was another guy whom nowadays I love. He's so much fun. He's just a great guy. But I was terrified of him because I originally thought that it was very like I just was not understanding.
Right.
And now I currently am realizing that it was actually very easy to understand. I was just so new that I didn't know what I didn't know. So I avoided eye contact with him for a while because I didn't want him to like talk to me because I was just scared of not understanding and feeling too on the spot. And that was about 4 years ago.
Already 4 years.
Yeah. Well, 4 years ago that I went to Def Coffee. 5 years that I've been signing. Then halfway through that semester, there were a couple late start classes at Phoenix College, so I took those. And then I took accelerated classes for ASL 3 and 4, 5 and 6, intro to interpreting, ethics and decision making, issues and resources, career work experience, which is really just observation hours of the working field. And I feel like that was deaf culture, linguistics, comparative linguistics, ASL, and English. That was the other big class. Fucking A. But so those were the classes I took, and then when I finished those, I was able to apply for the program, which it was $100 non-refundable application fee. You had to do an SLPI, which is a sign language proficiency interview. One of those two. So you had to like interview with somebody, and we did ours over like a video call. And they ask you questions, and you just like expand, and you just talk about whatever, and just show that you know what the language is. And then they're ranked out of 5. You need a minimum of a 3 to pass, which I'm kind of curious what I got. Like I kind of want to ask somebody. They don't tell you in the beginning because I think
they just tell you if you passed or you didn't.
Yeah. And then you had to write a paper for just to like prove that you know English. And then you need like a minimum of like a 3.0 GPA in the program. So, pass with flying colors because that's just how I do.
Naturally.
And then the program started, and it gets separated it starts, the first 3 weeks is like an intro to like the program and how interpreting even works. And we have, then after that we start our actual classes that focus on like interpreting skills. So we did consecutive ASL to English and English to ASL. So we have 2 separate classes, each focusing on just one path for language. So we're either voice interpreting in one class or we're interpreting into sign in the other. And consecutive, meaning that we had to, somebody would either speak or sign, we would watch or listen, and then once we had a big enough chunk of the message, we would pause the speaker and then start interpreting, and then allow the speaker to continue, and we'd keep going like that. And it was very funny because I remember quite often wondering why we had to do consecutive, because it seemed so much easier in the moment to do simultaneous, because I hated pausing and thinking and waiting, and I was like, let's go for it. But looking back, I would pause the video every sentence because otherwise I would feel too overwhelmed. And then the next semester we started simultaneous, and I realized why we start with consecutive. Because it can be a hot mess in the beginning. Because there's just a lot going on that you have to like get the message, and then you have to think about what it's meaning and how to put it into sign or into English and produce that while also still receiving more of the message.
Right.
So that was a hurdle. That was, as my teachers call it, the J curve. Um, and so we did the simultaneous semester, and we were done. And I feel like at this point, everything was going pretty well. We were just about to start our interactive. For class, we had, how many people do we have? We started with, I think, 10. We lost one after 3 weeks. The first 3 week class, like we didn't even do anything in those classes basically. They dropped out, and then we got another one who I think was from a different program, like cohort, and they needed to retake our class, so they retook. So then we were 10. Somebody dropped out, so we were down to 9. And we were very excited because she was graduating in May. So as of August, we were going to be 8 people, and that was exciting because then when we finally did team assignments, we could pair off evenly. And then, what's it called? I think it was a month, might have been a month before school started. One of our classmates got sick, went to the hospital, and did not make it out. So we were down to 7. Thanks, Nikki. Just kidding. We love her. We just like to give her shit. So we started consecutive interactive interpreting, which I still hate the pauses, but now I hate the pauses because I've done simultaneous. Don't get me wrong, the pauses are much better. You should use the pauses because you will produce a much more accurate message. I'm just a very impatient person, apparently.
Maybe not good for what you're going into.
Actually, everybody does simultaneous. There's a few instances in which, well, scratch that. Reverse it. Not reverse it. Simultaneous is used most often, but it's also a spectrum. So sometimes you're a lot closer to the message and sometimes you're a lot farther away, and it kind of just depends on what you need for that specific scenario. So we're doing interactive, which this is fun because now we get to go between 2 different languages. We're going between both languages. We don't just have to only speak or only sign. We're going back and forth. My teacher let me and another student do simultaneous though, because we talked about like we would because we knew how to, we would allow ourselves big chunks of information. So like 1 or 2 people would like go back and forth a little bit, and then we would then interpret back and forth between the 2 of them. And it was when my teacher was like, if you guys want to do it simultaneous, like go for it. I'm not going to stop you. So I was like, sick. So became simultaneous practice 2.0. We get to do nursing sim, which was a lot of fun. We paired with the college's nursing program because they have simulation days where they bring in people and they get to do the hospital intake forms back and forth, asking all the questions to like practice on real people. And my teacher decided to set up the program where she gets deaf people to come in. So the nursing students get to work with interpreters, the interpreters get to work with deaf people and nurses, and nobody's dead. So like we don't have to worry about anybody dying or like a life and death situation. Right. So it's all very low stakes. Loved that class. Or loved that day. I went to as many of them as I could. And then we started, that semester ended, and then our most recent semester was simultaneous consecutive, which had we finished the semester in person, we would have had a dental hygiene sim day and a behavioral health simulation day. And throughout the program, all of the years, we would bring in deaf guests to help kind of like make things feel more real. And so whether that just be that like a deaf person comes in and
we don't yawn on this podcast.
Whether that means a deaf person comes in and just gives like a little speech about these are the things that I've collected, or I'm a collector, or I used to live in this part of the world and now I moved here. We also have done working with a certified deaf interpreter. So there's hearing interpreters, and then there's certified deaf interpreters, and deaf interpreters are interpreters who they themselves are deaf, but they're kind of viewed as like a language specialist. So um, there can be sometimes where there's a deaf client who maybe came from another country and the ASL or English is not their first language, or maybe they don't really have a language, or I mean, there could be like 1,000 different reasons, but you call in the specialist, and we will then take the English, the spoken English, interpret it to the certified deaf interpreter, which they will then do like it seems like black magic, like it's so cool, and they turn it into a message that is understood by the deaf consumer, who then can respond, and then will tell the certified deaf interpreter, and then we interpret from them to the hearing consumer. So we got to work with them a little bit. We got to work on video relay service calls, which are how deaf people make phone calls. And that one is really hard because you have to, because hearing people are uncomfortable with silence.
Yeah. Or like videos and stuff like that. Like whenever somebody's trying, somebody's deaf and they're trying to sign, and like you can just see the look in people's eyes, and they're like, "Oh shit," and they panic.
Well, with video relay, it's kind of nice because we see the deaf person on video, but the hearing person doesn't. They're just on a phone call, like with us, like every.
Right. Which is funny enough, I didn't even think about that for phone calls. Like, even if you're trying to order like some pizza or something,
You can. That's the point of video relay.
right, yeah, at least in that perspective,
But so we call video relay. So what I mean is we got to practice with video relay. And like we had hours was a guy was calling his son about like, will you come watch the house? And so we were going back and forth. And I find that setting particularly challenging, mainly because you want to try to like make it seem like everything is one big smooth conversation. You obviously are able to step in and say, I need to do like 1 second for the interpreter while they grab clarification or X, Y, and Z. But the point is you want to be able to like kind of smooth things over, and you don't necessarily have to be as like obvious about it because they can't see you, so you can ask for clarification and just use like typical hearing people fillers and trying to like fudge the silence kind of. So that one's really hard, not gonna lie. That was a rough one for me. But then COVID happened, so we did everything at home. Oh, and we also got to do internships that semester, which I started off as freelance, which meant that I got to go to a bunch of different places with a bunch of different people and just do a wide variety of setting, and I really did enjoy it. It was a lot of fun. And then COVID happened, so we all had to stay home, and that internship was canceled. But I was lucky enough to be paired with another interpreter through a post-secondary education setting, and we did Zoom calls for everything. And as well as my teachers were offering up fabricated scenarios, so because we needed 80 hours of 80 hours of internship with a certified interpreter, because the point is that they are there with us and able to like feedback and talk with us and do all that kind of stuff. So we had that for the final semester, and it was kind of rough, especially in the beginning, but then we kind of like found our groove, got with it. We actually just finished 3-ish weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. So graduated, should be having that all come in the mail very soon, and I've already signed up for class next semester, which is voice interpreting into English. That was a redundant statement, I apologize. Interpreting into English from English-based signing, which is because ASL kind of has a spectrum, we like to call it. What we learned is in interpreting is there is the spectrum of signing in a more English fashion and signing in a stronger ASL fashion, and there's like a pendulum all the way that people fall on different parts on. So one of the skills that we worked on is client matching. So if somebody needs a more English interpretation, you provide it in a more English setting or in a more English style compared to if somebody needs a more ASL style. But one skill that is never like formally taught is if they're signing in a more English fashion, how to voice that, because they're giving you a lot of English, and sometimes Like, and the reason that a lot of English is given is they usually want those specific English phrases and words and everything picked, and so it's trying to match all of that while also getting the message in and everything like that. So it's one more extra skill. I've signed up to take that class to learn how to do that next semester. Current plans are to, once everything opens back up, apply for the Board of Evaluation for interpreters. I think it's four. And I have to take the English written test. If I pass the English written test, I can take the performance test. If I pass the performance test, I can come back to Arizona and get my generalist license and just be a licensed interpreter ready to work in Arizona. If I only pass the written but I don't pass performance, I can come back and get my provisional C license, which allows me to work in Arizona while teamed with a generalist license interpreter until I'm able to pass my performance. And that has been my journey, pretty much.
So I kind of want to go back to COVID that you were talking about. I think it's been really cool, especially on the news and stuff like that, that you've seen a lot more of interpreters on there, and definitely been giving a lot more exposure to the community. And obviously, I know that you one of them is actually your teacher as well. But what are just your thoughts on it? Obviously, you know, COVID is a terrible thing, but I think it's been really cool that at least in your community and stuff like that, that they've had, you know, more exposure during like news and stuff like that to be able to really hone their skills and kind of reach a broader audience, as opposed to like they're, you know, usually in shows or news and stuff like that, they're usually off to the side and not on camera or anything like that. But I think they definitely put more of a focal point on them, especially during these times. I just kind of want your thoughts on it, you know, your general ideas.
I'm mainly appreciative that they are finally being on TV, or the interpreters are being placed on TV, like side by side, picture in picture. Because the particularly with the COVID happening now, there's a specific interpreting. It's not an agency. They're like it's ERIC, emergency something, I don't know. But there are interpreters who specifically work with all these like emergency things. So it could be like wildfires or it's this corona stuff, and they are all like the most gifted interpreters I think that I've ever seen in my life. So they have been doing all of like the briefings and meeting with the governor and the reports and everything, but I'm just really excited that they're finally on TV. It's right now it's only because though it's breaking news and it's information that everybody needs. I'm pretty sure once Corona is over, then we're gonna go back to the way we were, which is a huge bummer, because also what I've been seeing is many people of the deaf community seem very excited that they are able to see the interpreter side by side on the TV, because that's not something that they usually are able to have access to that easily. So it's been very exciting. One thing though, in relation to Corona, that I'm interested in to say I don't know if that's the right word, but is
You're intrigued by?
Yeah, I wonder how this will change interpreting in general, because everybody's had to resort to using virtual like Zoom or possibly using video remote interpreting. Video remote interpreting, and typically that's something that the deaf community has to fight against, and they want to use it in hospitals, but it's not always sufficient. It's not always the most effective use. So one thing I'm interested in, slightly worried about the future, is whether people will think, well, we've been using virtual like video remote interpreting for everything lately. Well, why can't we do it all of the time? And it's because these are very specific circumstances, as well as like sometimes you mostly, like 9.5 times out of 10 you need an interpreter in the room with you. It just makes things a lot easier.
Right.
So that's one thing I'm very interested about with COVID. But seeing people on screen lately have been like super sick. Like, damn.
For sure. it's a lot more interesting just watching and trying to pick up. For somebody who doesn't, I don't sign or anything like that, it's just kind of interesting to try and pick up maybe words or phrases and the actions that they do and kind of learn a little bit from it. But I kind of want to take it back closer to when you first started. So I'm assuming you first start out, you just learn how to finger spell, correct? You finger spell words out from there. What's maybe like one of the first phrases that you learned how to do?
Um, well, what's funny is actually I don't know if there was necessarily the first like phrase, because what happened was I picked up fingerspelling, and that might have actually been off one of those like school posters you get at like the teacher store. But once you have the alphabet memorized, I just fingerspelled random things, like whatever word I saw was something that I would fingerspell, and the point that the thing that I found beneficial with that compared to just like practicing ABCD is you learn how words are paired together because it's you never really fingerspell letters in their alphabetical order. Instead, you're getting words like oh god, what's a random word? Apple and happy and fluffy and sprinkle and stuff like that. So I like those because it instead teaches you one, you have to remember what the letter looks like and not just think, well, this is the hand shape I make after the letter Q. But you have to think about what is the finger spell or what is the hand shape for the letter S. And then also it slowly starts to teach you how to get faster, just because you start memorizing what they all look like. So I don't know if there's necessarily a certain word or phrase that I fingerspelled in the beginning. I think it
Yeah,
was just
you
whatever I
just
could
keep
see. I would
practicing.
just
So for somebody that doesn't interpret at all in the sign language, is there like kind of a tier system? You start off finger spelling and you graduate to like actual incorporation of your hands into movements. So like let's say like you finger spell bottle, correct? But then what action would you use to signify bottle? Like, can I have a bottle? What's like, is there a tier or like a way that you learn from going from finger spelling to actually doing, thank you and everything else? Is there some sort of a learning curve to that, or is that just something kind of over time? You, like you said, you just consistently would finger spell anything that you could, and then you just slowly just adapted into words or phrases, sentences, what may it be, if that makes sense.
kind of, I think. Let's see if my answer makes sense, and you let me know if my answer doesn't make sense. So, fingerspelling is fingerspelling is very interesting because fingerspelling is also used a lot to convey the English word that you want, as compared to the sign portraying the concept of what you want. So, like when I first started, one of the things that I would do is if I knew certain words, I would sign the words that I knew, and then if I found myself getting stuck, I would fingerspell it and then move on. And that's something that is used quite often, especially if you're kind of like going to learn about something, or like what is it called? It's also nice just is if you go to deaf social hours. Usually, if you fingerspell, somebody will tell you what the sign is, and then you can just start using the sign instead of having to fingerspell it every time. But that was something that I used to do. Would if I
Yeah,
just
I
didn't.
guess I'm just trying to think of maybe someone that's maybe a little more homegrown and doesn't really get a lot of, like you said, like the social experience and learning from people that, people that are deaf and people who are interpreters at the same time. Maybe like, how do you kind of jump? Because when you learn a new language, you start off with the alphabet, and then you kind of start words and then phrases, and how you're able to put that in a coherent sentence that makes sense with inflection or whatever it may be. Like, how you were just like, what's maybe one of the first words you were able to just pick up on? Obviously, I'm sure the most used signs are thank you and you're welcome. Hi is easy, stuff like that. But is there just like you, like you said, was there some words out there that maybe stumped you for a while that you got help with eventually, and somebody was like, well, this is how you sign it, as opposed to you just trying to fingerspell. Kind of like, I guess it's weird because for you, you kind of just evolved with it, and it wasn't really like a stepping ladder. You just kind of naturally went with it. But like maybe for somebody that doesn't have a community around them, how would they? I mean, besides watching videos and learning from signing like that, how is there an easier way for people to kind of get to that next level?
Well, for like I had the book, and then I also looked up some stuff on the internet. So that's where I think a lot of mine come from, and I think that one's I guess kind of tricky because like there are established signs for things. So it's kind of just like I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult because sometimes people come to deaf socials, and I love them coming. But if they only have like the finger spelled everything, there's a lot of like teaching them as we go. Like,
Yeah.
I want sushi, please. Is having to teach all of them. So I picked up like common words in sentences.
Okay.
So like no, think, want,
Yeah, you get the fragments
please.
of it.
Like, yeah. So then I could kind of fill in the more specific words that I wanted with finger spelling or going from there. I also didn't start hanging out with deaf people until after I was taking 2 semesters worth of ASL classes. So I also had a pretty solid vocab going into like socials and talking with people. Particularly being forcing myself to talk to people not in my native language.
And that's actually going to lead my next question. Sorry, I'm no Joe Rogan, so I'm terrible at it. What was, if you perchance remember the first time that you actually maybe interpreted or just signed to somebody like a total stranger, like somebody out there in the world, whether you might have been at work or somebody that maybe needed help with something, you're behind them in line, and the associate or whatever that's helping them is just paralyzed in fear. Like, do you remember your first time that you
Is it interpreting or just talking?
either or both, if in case if they might have been in the same.
There was one time I worked at Levi's, and I think this was before I'd taken classes. Yeah, because I was still in high school when I worked at Levi's. There was a woman who just came in looking for pants or whatever, and I don't remember what happened, but I was like, "Oh, deaf." I was like, "I think I got this." So we had an interaction back and forth, and I helped her buy pants at Levi's. I know she taught me the sign for colors.
What is the sign? What color was she looking for?
She wanted to know if there were different colors of pants, and I was like, "What?" And just so she finger spelled first, I was like, "Oh."
So when you originally first interacted with this lady, was it purely finger spelling at the time, or did you kind of know a little bit of phrases here and there?
I knew some. I could
Fragmented.
Yeah, like I could definitely like we could work it out.
Yeah, you could
work
patch
it
it together. What about maybe the first time that you interpreted for somebody that's maybe had trying to order something, or maybe was asking, trying to get some help from somebody, and they're like, I don't know I can't help this person. If you even have.
Yes. Okay. So 4 years ago, actually, almost to the month. I think to the month. My All right. Well, this is like the big one. Before then, we'd like gone to like Dave and Buster's and like got stuff like that, and like there was maybe like some interpreting like communication thing going on, but but we went camping, and one day we had gone out on the boat. We came back and we went to, it was like Dylan's restaurant or something over off of Lake Pleasant, and it was.
Don't fucking dox me! How dare you?
Huh?
Don't dox me. You give away your place, your position, where your home base is. Continue. Sorry, you're at Dylan's.
And I feel like we were with somebody, and they were gonna order another Diet Coke, and I think they took a bite as a waitress comes by because waitresses have impeccable timing with that.
Of course.
And her mouth
like,
was
how's
full.
your food? And you're like,
like
it's all in your
mid-bite.
mouth. You're like, oh, that's good.
And she had been like, "Oh, I wanted another Diet Coke," so we let the waitress know that they would like another Diet Coke. And that was actually the reason I think that this one sticks in my mind is because that was kind of the first time that I learned it's important to ask if the deaf person wants interpreting to be done.
Okay.
Because it sometimes can be viewed as like I'm taking over for this conversation and like I'm gonna take care of this because you can't.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. Rather than you just assuming and start interpreting, you have to ask them and be like, "Do you want me to?" Or "You got it."
Yeah.
So you got it.
And
I gotcha.
it was funny that actually.
What's Diet Coke? Is there a sign for that?
No.
You finger spell?
Yeah. I thought you were asking me what Diet Coke is. I was like, it's a soda made by Coca-Cola product. Like, what are you talking about?
That's a whole different podcast. This is the Sign ASL podcast. So Diet Coke.
Mm-hmm. And she had just let that of like, she wasn't offended, but she was like, just a heads up, like this is going to be something you should stick in the back of your head. It's important to ask if they want interpreting, which is actually funny because then this came up a couple months ago during our Christmas party for Desert Ridge. And the waitresses were going around asking people's orders, and I was like, I wonder. So I'd walked over to see, and I was going to ask if anybody wanted interpreting to be done. But somebody who is another interpreter that goes there, I was like kind of like waiting back, and they had let me know like, oh, don't forget to ask, and I was like, yeah, I know, I got this one. But that was very interesting. So that was, I think, one of the first times that I kind of interpreted like that really felt like it instead of just like, can we get the pool balls and some pool cues, please, for the what's it called?
Right.
But I think that might have been like one of the first couple times.
But those were all for people you knew.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Stranger? Oh,
so have you done any interpreting for a stranger?
No.
Probably not as common.
No, and like at least like not that's not related to like internship because then I've done it for strangers. Yeah. But usually in that case it's like I've never like gone to a store and had somebody been like, meh.
Yeah, and you're like, I got this. Have you let's talk about the community for a little bit. You're obviously a part of the community and you have a lot of friends in the community as well and people you enjoy being around and learning. And just from an outsider's perspective, I think that it's whenever I hear you, talking about it or in your groups and stuff like that, it always seems like a community that's very supportive, and you guys are constantly evolving and learning new things. Like you guys are always positive and you bring everybody up at the same time. What are your thoughts kind of about the community and the things that you've learned throughout the years being a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely all try to stay very positive. So it's really interesting because for the most part, I've actually had a very positive experience with everybody in the deaf community. But just as sometimes hearing people are terrible, like there is going to be the occasional deaf person who's just like mean. Okay. But overall, I have great experiences with it. My classmates and everybody feels great, and we're one of our teachers talked about a growth mindset in the beginning of one of our things, so we kind of have taken that with us of trying not to be negative talk whenever we talk about whatever. So like if we're feeling particularly bad after an interpreting thing, an assignment, video, whatever it may be, we try to focus on like, wow, that was really terrible, but I'm working on continuing the skill.
Yeah, you take the positives and kind of evolve and can, adapt.
And because that's also one of the things is with interpreting is an art, not a science, and everything about language is evolving as well as like the world itself is evolving. So therefore, languages have to evolve to match the current world. That's one of the things is about constantly evolving with us as we're always trying to keep updated on everything because the more you know, the better you can interpret, and the better you can interpret, the better the interactions go. So one thing with interpreting is you always have to be learning new things and prepping before assignments to make sure that you know everything as well as you can because if you know it really well, you can sign it more clearly, and the more clear the interpretation, the better chance of people understanding you, and if people understand you, then everybody gets to go home happy.
Is there maybe like some misconceptions or maybe some roadblocks or difficulties that other people might not know about when being an interpreter at all? Maybe something that we don't know because we just kind of think, general population might just think it's like, all right, well, you learn this language and you just interpret it. Is there maybe some obstacles in the way or misconceptions that people might have about you just go and you sign and, that's it?
That is what a lot of people think. A lot of people are under the impression that because you know another language, it means you can interpret into said language. And that's not the case, just kind of at all. Like one example being in class, we've learned about expansion features and compression techniques. Expansion features are functions of ASL where not every word has a sign, but you can sometimes get around a specific English word by signing something within it. So like an easy example is like school supplies. You like there is a sign for school and there is a sign for supplies, but it doesn't quite hit home
When you try and sign it
if you do it
together?
together.
Okay.
So a lot of people will throw in so an expansion feature to use is explaining by example, in which you provide examples of school supplies. So you can say like paper, pencils, and rulers or erasers, and you kind of once you provide those three things, you're able to visualize, oh, all of those things plus there's more, you know that it's school supplies. And if you just know sign language, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to pick up on things like that or describing and then doing or using your 3D space or how to facet appropriately, because faceting is more what I view it as is more for like concepts. So like the sign for compassion doesn't have one, but you can sign like you could do like kind-hearted and nice and sweet, and those all like together can mean compassion
Gets the
or
point
compassionate.
across.
Exactly. So that's a big one. Everybody thinks that just because you can sign means that you can interpret, and that is so not the case. And that's just putting it into sign, let alone. And it works the opposite way, because many times when like deaf people can set up this really elaborate sentence that can be conveyed in English very simply. And so you like it's just one of those, like, it works both ways. And so if you know sign, you might start saying things of like, I need to go to the store and get paper, pencils, rulers, erasers, stuff like that, when instead you could have just said, I need to go get school supplies. We are important as interpreters. I feel like many times also we've talked about in class of companies being like, we don't want to pay for people, or why should we have to pay for people, or we've got somebody on our roster who knows ASL at like a level 2 level, or ASL.
Oh, speaking of which, I don't mean to interject. How many levels are there in signing or
My
in ASL?
school provides 6 levels. It kind of depends where you go. I've seen like 4 or 5 being like a common one, and our 6th level was like an elective. You don't have to take it. But
so what are like? Can you kind of break down what the different levels are? For like the generalized 5 or what it may be, like what goes into it.
Let's see. From what I feel like for me, level 1 was a lot of just like vocab and basic sentence structure.
Right. That's your beginner class.
The next class we went over conditional sentences, so like if-thens, and then some more vocab. And I want to say conjunctions, but I feel like conjunctions isn't the right term. But kind of like when you go to tell stories and kind of things like that, like how to link kind of like two clauses together.
Right.
Level 3, we started working on classifiers, which are sometimes called depicting verbs, which are basically just you using hand shapes to tell the story a little bit more clear and like show how things looked on your hands. So if you're like saying that somebody was walking towards me, instead of signing somebody walk towards me, you can just like show them walking towards you.
Oh, okay.
So that was level 3. I feel like a little bit level 4, and I think each time we just get a little bit more into like storytelling, and it's each time it's like it breaks it down. But looking back, I'm like, I don't know what the exact differences were. Like a lot, like it seems. I think each time we just learn a new grammatical structure. So like the topic comments, time frames, telling stories, different ways to sign things, what different things mean, idioms. I think ASL 5 was like basically storytelling because I think that one we had to tell a couple stories and give presentations. Um, and level 6 was we did some medical terminology, we did sex signs, and I think a little bit more with like classifier work.
It's always interesting to watch the quote unquote efficiency of interpreters, especially at a very high level. You obviously have people that are bilingual that can process what's being said to them and say it back in the language. But I think for an interpreter, I think it's like on another level because you have to process what's being said out loud, even if you're off to the side, whatnot, and then learn, kind of like how you said, build that into storytelling and to be able to feed that back out through signing or fingerspelling, whatever it may be, at a very efficient rate. Any thoughts on that? Maybe for people at a higher level, just kind of like the work conditioning gets into it because you have to. Obviously, a lot of other things go into it: cadence, inflections, whatnot, the pacing of it, just how efficient they are and how they're able to get all this input and put it back into flawless feedback into sign. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah, so what also is happening is we are receiving the message and then we have to break down to what it actually means, and it's different going into sign because in English you can hear I gotta go to the store, which means that I need to go to the store. And so, but if you were to try to break it down of like I got to go to the store, then that would also be like you'd have to say I acquire to have to go to the store. So that's all a lot different.
That adds just another level of complexity because now you have to, like you said, kind of break down the sentence and be like, well, I can't do this, so like you have to replace that word or kind of restructure the sentence before you sign it back out.
All while making sure you don't add in any new information, omit any of the information, or change it. So there's a lot of brain power that's happening all at the same time because you have to hit specifically in simultaneous, which is why consecutive is great because you can listen to a couple sentences, take a beat, figure out what they're trying to say, and then provide the interpretation. Versus simultaneous, you're like a sentence behind them, maybe a sentence, maybe two, and then trying to figure it out on the fly while still listening to what else they're saying. So there's a lot of brain power going on, which is why we work in teams. We should work in teams. We don't always work in teams because that means you have to spend more money for more interpreters. But we try to switch off every like 15-20 minutes because your brain just gets tired of having to take in a message, process what they're trying to say, and then figure out. Once you have what they're trying to say, you then have to take it and put it into a new language that does not have to do anything with English, because that's the other problem. My teacher, my first semester, described it as imagine that you are given a present from one culture and it's wrapped up in a pretty box with a pretty bow, and you have to give it to somebody from another culture, but they only accept gifts that are wrapped up in coconuts. So you have to take the pretty bow and then figure out how to get it wrapped and put it into a coconut and give it to the second culture, and then reverse that. If you're given a coconut, how do you put it into a pretty little box that they will then accept? And it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of processing. It's a lot of mental strain, and that's also where your preparation can come in, because if you know what you're talking about, then it doesn't take as much brain power for you to think about how to talk to talk about it in the other language. So, like for example, if you were giving a presentation on YouTubing, and I did not look into anything about YouTubing, I would be spending a lot more of my brain power trying to figure out what you're saying compared to if I knew exactly what you were talking about. Less of my brain power is going to be focused on what you're saying, and it can be put into how I want to say it
That's
and to
me
make sure
asking you
to
these
deliver it.
questions. I'm trying, guys, as a host to try and give him good questions. Like I said, somebody that's not a part of the community at all, to kind of give something that you maybe give a little more light to while trying to make sense to him as best as I can. But is there perhaps maybe like any guidelines or like parameters or some sort of like don't do this when it comes to maybe you're the third party between an interpreter and someone who's deaf? Is there, or is it maybe more kind of like a case by case depending on the individuals, anything like that?
Um, what do you mean by like a don't do?
Maybe like some things like maybe you're speaking to somebody that's deaf and there's an interpreter there. I believe you don't generally look at the interpreter.
Yeah,
You look at the
got
deaf
you.
person. You look at the person that you're speaking to because it's considered rude. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, so definitely use first person pronouns. Talk to the deaf person. Yeah, but this is a tricky statement I'm about to say because you want to act like the interpreter is not there, and the goal is that you kind of forget that the interpreter is there. But at the same time, we're human beings, and we are already in this interaction, so therefore we have already had a shift on the way that this interaction is going to go compared to if there was no interpreter and both people spoke the same language. There's no getting around what we do. But us as interpreters, if we do our job well, everybody kind of forgets that the interpreter's there. If we do it right, we stand in a way that kind of forces the hearing person to look at the deaf person. At least that's kind of the goal is. Like let's say if it's a job interview and you go into the manager's office and they sit across from the manager, like always, we might stand behind the manager. So then the manager can't see us. We can just voice whatever we see from the deaf person. The deaf person can then maintain eye contact with the manager, but also be looking at us and be able to look at both of us. So from a hearing person, what are some don't do's? I don't know, this one's kind of hard for me to answer just because like it really kind of depends on like deaf people and like their answers. I know things not to say to interpreters would be like, why do I have to pay for you? And the answer is because it's the law.
Is that something that happens often still today? People are like, why should I have to pay when I can just get a notepad or a phone or some nonsense and they shortcut it?
Well, we've got VRI or Susie down in accounting knows some signs, so we don't need you. And which is also funny because there's a tax write-off for, I believe it's businesses, like small businesses. There's a tax write-off for using interpreters, so like you can just write us off in your taxes. So like it's not like a huge financial burden, but like it's the law. Like you have to hire an interpreter, a qualified licensed interpreter for if one is requested. It's part of like it's written into the Americans with Disabilities Act. But like we've gotten that one, and also like don't talk to the interpreter. Like honestly, in general, not gonna lie, just I mean like
speak to the person you're speaking to.
Yeah,
like you said, the interpreter could be behind you, signing to them, and then they can sign back, and you can just talk behind them. Obviously, there'll be a slight feedback delay, because they'll have to sign, but it's essentially the same thing as talking. So
but also like there was my teacher, we just did one about like she called it interpreter microaggressions, but basically it's like things that hearing people say to interpreters. And some of them are like they'll say something and then they'll sorry, let me back up. They'll preface something with, I don't know how you're going to do this, but, and then they'll say whatever. And it's like, you focus on your job. I'll focus on mine. you don't need to worry about how I'm going to sign something.
If you're good enough at interpreting, you shouldn't be like, well, I don't know if you'll be able to do, whatever I'm gonna say.
I don't know how you're gonna do this. Hello.
It's like, that's why I'm here, to interpret.
Mhm.
So just talk,
Like
and I got it.
I've been trained for this, so you just focus on your thing. But there's things like that. Hearing people always think that we're like in charge of deaf people and like we're like their rides.
Or like you're their handlers or
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't like, bruh. I showed up. I've never met Susie before. I'm not giving her a ride home.
These people are individuals. They have their own lives and all this other stuff. They don't need me. I'm just here to interpret if they need me for something.
Mm-hmm. My one teacher has talked about she's done doctor's appointments before where she has been able to encourage doctors to get like the little molds or whatever, like whatever whatever things they have in their office, like models and whatever, and show what something will be. So like if it's in a dentist, like the little teeth model thing. So my teacher's like,
show and tell, essentially. You
yeah, and
you
so
got a
then
skeleton or
my teacher as the interpreter didn't have to do anything really because it's like if they can get the doctor to show on the model, then it's a lot more visual, and then the deaf person will typically like that better. Can't speak for all of them, but it's one of those where my teacher's like, I didn't have to do any interpreting, but that was still like effective communication, because really that's what we're there for, is we're there to facilitate communication and make sure that the communication is being effective for all. Which is also another thing, is we're there for the hearing people as much as we are there for the deaf people, because the hearing people also need us to voice what the deaf people are trying to say to them.
You're there so everything can live in cohesion, and you can be efficient and get whatever needs to be done in the most effective manner for both parties or multiple parties, whatever it may be. What's your favorite phrase or sentence to sign? If you maybe had one. Obviously, all everybody wants to know is how to curse and sign. But like, is there any interesting words when you sign it? You have to do some ridiculous movement, or like maybe two words that mash up that just create like you're throwing up gang symbols, or you look like you're out of your element.
I don't know.
What's your favorite word to sign?
There's some that I use a lot, but I think it's also because I use the English equivalent a lot. So like I say literally quite frequently. And that one is just like true work. Okay. So I do that one a lot. There are some that are fun, but it's hard to use. Like, it just, the opportunity to use them doesn't come up a lot. Yeah, like one of them is Train Gone Sorry, which what I learned is like it's usually if you're talking with somebody and then a third person comes over, says, "What are you talking about?" and you don't want to explain it again to them, you tell them Train Gone Sorry. Like, you missed the boat. Like, I'm not gonna explain it again. So that one's fun, but there's never really a moment to use it. Also, I always feel so I just feel really mean if I were to use it. So like I just don't feel good. So the opportunity never arises.
Are there any maybe words or phrases that you might have had difficulty catching, on with trying to sign it? Or after, like repetition is key, practicing it and you get it down after a while.
Repetition is key. I think a lot of them are like, I'll just forget that sign exists, and it's because it's not one that I use often, but when I see it again, I'm like, oh, right. That's how that can be used.
Are there any common signs that maybe overlap, like super close? Maybe some signs that you might do that mean two different things that are very similar that you can maybe think of?
There's the one that everybody knows about, like the thank you and the FU. A lot of so this is work, and there's a lot of people will do this one, and that one's just like a very dirty, inappropriate sign that
we won't talk about.
No.
It's so interesting that the fact that just the slight movement of your wrist could totally make it something completely different.
Mm-hmm. It's also really hard to talk about triangles sometimes because you have to be very careful because there are triangles. But if you try to do anything like this and it's vagina and you've lost it, so you have to be very careful about like what the triangles are like and just not connect these at all.
How many times have you seen people say thank you or you're welcome incorrectly? Or any, phrase?
What something that I found interesting is the way that see people sign "You're welcome" is like, okay, so in my ASL 1 class, we actually learned that there is no real sign for "You're welcome." Instead, you can respond with like things of like, "Oh, it's fine, no problem."
Of course.
You can say thank you back, yeah, of course, and kind of like how I feel a lot of people respond to thank you currently in like current times, because I feel like nobody really says "You're welcome" anymore. I feel like "You're welcome" is almost like a pointed, like "You're welcome."
Yeah, I kind of feel like that at work sometimes when like people are like thank you. I would just say, "Oh yeah, no problem." Because I feel like you're welcome even if I not the tone and inflection, it kind of sounds like, "Oh, you're welcome."
Yeah, like I did this for
You're
you.
welcome.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Versus like no problem being like, oh, like it was no problem to me. And so I kind of view it the same way in ASL, but a lot of people will sign "You're welcome" as if you're saying welcome to this location. And so like they're just different. Deaf people like will do. I've seen some deaf people do it though, so like it works and people know what you mean when you sign it. But that was an interesting one that I've learned that I'm like, interesting. There isn't a "You're welcome," but there also is. Because language is fluid. And that's also really interesting because sometimes you'll meet one person who will say, don't ever sign this, and this is not right. And then you meet another person's like, no, I sign that all the time because that's just what I know. And you just have to deal with it and be able to adjust and match whoever you are signing with.
Well, it was awesome having you on, Matt, and letting us know kind of about the whole world of it, kind of getting your insight on it as being an interpreter and the community, stuff like that. I'll leave you off with one more question. Is there any good communities out there or programs, stuff like that you know of or that you would that you want more exposure for people to know about in the world of signing ASL, anything like that?
I don't know, because so there. I mean, just like in general, I think knowing a little bit more about the deaf community is always a good time. Your local community college probably has something about it. I went to mine, which is where I got the interpreting thing, and then it's kind of one of those like you don't know what you don't know, and then once you start taking classes, you learn a lot more. So like I've learned about like deaf blind people who are both deaf and blind, and how their communication is different from somebody who's just deaf, and just all kinds of stuff, and like the different kinds of interpreting, like when deaf people will do song performances in sign. Those are a lot of fun. There are people who like just deaf storytellers who are able to do it really well. So it's kind of one of those, just start looking and you'll find some gems.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Anytime.
I'm assuming you don't want any plug anything. You never do.
I don't have anything in which to plug.
Thank you all. If you want, more conversations with Matt about anything, please let us know. Want to know more about ASL or the signing community, or Matt's always welcome on the podcast to discuss more, or if he has other people that want to talk as well, they're always welcome to. But hopefully y'all enjoyed. Have a great night.